So if you have any questions during a session that maybe she can refer back to later, or especially ones that are technical in nature, questions about the Zoom platform, feel free to type them in the group chat, and I'll do my best to answer those. Towards the end of the session, I am going to paste the link to an evaluation form. So I'm going to make myself a little note to do that so that I don't forget. As I told Laureen, it sounds like she has a lot to cover, and as you know, we're in a relatively short session time period. So I'm going to do my best to be sort of out of her way. Laureen, if there are no other questions or statements from the group, I'm going to go ahead and start monitoring the chat and turn things over to you to get started with the session.
Sure, and you've already started the recording, so that is good. So we don't have to remember not to forget that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with sharing my screen. Okay, and I do have I have the chat box up on my end as well, but hopefully everybody can see the slides. If anyone wants to chat in and confirm that, that's also great. Thank you. So thank you to Appalachian State and to the North Carolina Library Association College and University section for hosting this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you guys some of what I have been up to. So let's go ahead and get started with sprinting to foundation skills in citing, a new twist on Citation Relay. So, forget that. How to change the slides. So I first want to go over kind of the roots of this exercise and give proper credit where it's due to the University of Northern Colorado, who initially built the citation relays. So I'm going to talk first about how those are structured and sort of how I have morphed things for Colorado Mesa since then. The basic idea of the relay is to present a fun and engaging opportunity for students to work on their proficiency with citations. What's exciting about that is that they do actually seem to get excited. We'll get more into that as the explanation goes on, but you basically would, and I'm going to use sort of ideal mathematical numbers here. So let's say you have 20 students. And you create two teams. So you have team 1 of 10 students and, or rather team A as I have here, and team B of 10 students. And then you make 4 or 5 small groups. My notes say 5, but obviously the slide says 4. So you would make smaller groups within the teams. Usually even numbers, will add a third to a team if we have an odd number. But the main idea is that each smaller group will have one item to develop a citation for. University of Northern Colorado was using a journal article, a book, a chapter in an edited book, and a newspaper article as common items. They have different precise items, so the book might be Moby Dick for one group, and it might be Wuthering Heights for the other group, but they still both have to cite a book. So neither team should have a more difficult job than the other, but they won't also be able to cheat off of what the other is writing on the board either. So what'll happen is if you're in a smaller group, you'll go ahead and start writing down using your resources what the citation is, say, for the book. And if you feel ready, you can then help the rest of your team get ready. You want to get ready on paper in your groups before you actually go up to the board. And when you go up to the board, that's when sort of the relay component really starts. So let's talk a little bit about how that part of it works. So when you start the relay component and students are up at the board, say group 1, if you're the book group, you might go up first. And so you and your partner are up there and you're writing your citation. If it's correct, and usually you signal that you would like a judge to check you by ringing a bell or otherwise calling attention to yourself, which students are usually pretty good about being able to do. and the judge will come and check you. If it's correct, we just basically celebrate and move on to the next team so that you get that speed component of the relay entering into things. If it's incorrect, your team can then assist you, your whole team can then assist you in making corrections to your citation. Ideally, these things are caught when you're working together before you go up to the board, but as you might imagine, they often miss a little thing here or there. And then once that's correct, you move on to group 2. And so you get this sort of, you get classroom movement, you get some energy. There's always, no matter how many people hate citations, there's always going to be a competitive person in the room who has the energy to say things like, all right, come on, let's go, let's go. And that's where some of the excitement comes from. So things get visual, they get competitive, and they get energetic. The next slide here shows some of the resources. So this is where the archiving of things will be nice, because I can get them, my slides and everything, and you'll have these links handy, but they actually have a YouTube video that they use and promote on their LibGuide of the students actually having this active, energetic sort of fun within the session itself. And one of the great things is the final moment where a student says, I want a rematch. And so never before have students craved to take on citation-based work until, of course, you could make it competitive and involve stickers. So, so there's a lot of really good content that has come out of these LOAC sessions promoting the success that University of Northern Colorado was having with their citation relays. And so what happened was I ended up substituting for a psychology course, and I heard the students talking about how heavily the faculty member was lecturing and presenting on citation style for APA within their class. And I thought, you know, that could be kind of dry. And maybe this would be a good opportunity to try out a relay on our campus. And so what I ended up doing was actually getting her a lot of the links that are on this slide right now and allowing her to kind of explore it on her own, outside of a marketing pitch for library instruction, and letting her see how her students might come to appreciate a different sort of activity within their class. So, lo and behold, she ended up getting back in touch with me and saying, I want to try this next semester with both of my Intro to the Profession courses, which is a 200 level for our psychology students. So because that class is a little bigger, there's usually between 20 and 30 students in it, we decided to have 5 groups, and the faculty member chose what types of items they wanted their students to work on. So common types of items for psychology. So you have a journal article, you have a whole book, you have a chapter in an edited book, a magazine article, as well as a web page. And as with the initial relays that we saw with Northern Colorado, each sort of small group within a team works on one of those item types. When the whole team feels that they are ready to go up to the board, they go right on up to the board, one mini group at a time. And we go through and help them, you know, determine if they are correct or not. So what's exciting here is that I do a little feedback survey afterwards. And you can actually see here, the question is basically, how did you feel in terms of your confidence going into the session about APA style? And how did you feel after the session with APA style? And so you can actually see this arc of confidence. I won't say that our aim has ever been to get people from a 1 to a 5 within this session, but it's usually shifting from a 1 to a 2 or a 3, or from a 2 to a 3 or a 4. And so developing student confidence over time. So what you want to see is the 1s going down and the 4s and 5s going up a little bit, because those are a little lower. And then that shift from 2 being higher to 3 being higher. So this was telling me that at the very least, we were helping students develop confidence with the sessions themselves. One thing that we did change is that we had, I think the instructor found a bell and a whistle that the students could use, and you might imagine that the whistle did not go over very well among a mixed group of students. So I actually ran down to the local Rite Aid one day and I got for $1 a piece little dog squeezy chew toys. So I have a donut and an ice cream cone, and those seem to work really well, and the squeezy toy sounds are very entertaining. So so that is one thing that we did tweak a little bit. I should mention that the judges initially with the Northern Colorado setup and with ours are considered non-partial, or partial, definitely impartial is what I mean, sorry, impartial and non-student individuals. And so myself and the instructor tend to be the ones doing it. The first time I did it, I wanted a little bit of extra support for both of us handy, so I brought in an additional librarian. So making sure to keep the judges impartial and keeping them non-students does seem to help. This professor also offers 2 extra credit points to the winning team. So that seems to drive them as well. I don't think that there's all that many additional opportunities for instruction throughout their class. So it seems to bring students into it pretty well. What else? So those are the big things from the first time that we did it. I do have some qualitative feedback as well. In terms of that, this is still from their feedback survey. So they have a quantitative section where they basically rate their self-assessment of their skills going into the session and as a result of the session. And then we have qualitative questions, which include, what do you feel you learned through the citation relay? What was the best part of the citation relay? And on the next slide, we'll go over the third question, which is, do you have any feedback for CMU librarians about your citation relay session? So that's a way for them to converse directly with me. So you can kind of tell here there's a lot of really positive feedback and some other options in terms of feedback that indicate sort of what they're getting out of the session. I do enjoy the squeaky duck comment. I think at one point we must have had a squeaky duck, but we have the donut and the ice cream cone now as well. But I think what these comments speak to are elements like, I learned through doing. I noticed how important the details are. So maybe as right as they think it is when they write it down, when they go up to the board and we actually have more discussion about it, they're catching things that they're maybe not catching when they write it down, or they're not catching when they have conversations as a group. I particularly like where the student says, I know where I need to pay more attention. Because they're catching common pitfalls for themselves, or one specific rule that they consistently forget. So that seems to work pretty well. So we'll shift into the next slide where they're kind of talking a little bit more to me. And part of what comes up here is that they're actually maybe not aware that they can talk to us about citation styles in the library. And I do consider that to be something that librarians should be able to talk to students about. I think of it as closing the loop from taking things to information discovery and topic generation all the way through the documentation and information creation element of what they do when they're at university. And of course, the student who says that it's the most fun that they've ever had citing. So I can't imagine that they've ever had a lot of fun before, but the fact that they had some fun works enough for me. And then at the bottom of this slide, you'll see that there are actually 2 points of critique that came out of this feedback form. And I'm going to address them separately because we did make some tweaks to our process as a result of that. So the first critique, which is on the left hand of this slide, and I'll let you all read it. I won't be the person who reads off their slides, but you can see what that quote says there. And what we realized was that at least one of us was taking more the approach of, nope, it's not right yet. And the students were getting really frustrated because they weren't sure what they needed to fix, what they needed to focus on. If you think specifically of trying to cite a chapter in an edited book and all the different elements of a citation like that, like having the word in, reversing the order of the initials and the last names of the authors, the E in EDS is capitalized, and all these little tiny details in a citation that can be quite big. Just being told, nope, you're not right yet, is something that I could agree that would be frustrating for students. So what we do, and I'll show you an example on the next slide, is say this is what they put up on the board, and we'll ignore indentation for the time being, just for simplicity of me being able to build a slide. But say this is what they put up on the board. And again, we'll keep APA style in mind. The way that we would go about telling them corrections would be more like on this slide here, where we would say you have 2 errors on your top line, you have 3 on your second line, and 1 on your third line. And so that way, at the very least, there's things that they know that they don't need to focus on. So in this case, the publisher is something that they have right. Then they're going to look and they're say, oh my God, I forgot the period after the N, and oh, the title isn't capitalized that way. And they'll go ahead and they'll correct a bunch of errors in the title all at the same time, just based on realizing that they had done the capitalization wrong. But we do try to give them more specific directions about, oh, there's something missing on the first line, or you have a typo in your second line. I'll even go so far as to tell students whether the error would be evident on the source that we handed them, or whether it is a format error, and so whether their classmates should be able to determine what they're missing from looking at an APA style guide versus whether they need to look at the source itself. And those hints tend to help an awful lot. They certainly crack down on the frustration. So the second critique here more gets at the fact that the students actually want to know what they're doing wrong. And I don't know that we didn't anticipate that going in, but it's more a case now where we try to be more deliberate in making sure that we are going through things a little bit more. So at the very least, I try to take a moment after a particular group has finished up at the board to try and reinforce what the changes we were making were, or to check in with the rest of the team and say, did you understand what we just fixed there, while another group is going up to the board. So I do try to have those conversations, and the students tend to appreciate it. It's those moments of, oh, I get it now, that kind of stuff. And so we feel pretty good about these sessions now. And I'm going to pull in sort of some overall data from 100 or so students who've completed the survey at this point. And you can generally see that there is the same kind of pattern of shift from the lower end of the spectrum in terms of their confidence with APA style going into it, and at the higher end of the spectrum, or at least more in the middle, coming out of the session. So I do see the question in there, and I'll just take a moment now. So someone's got in the chat box a question as to whether I have found a way to share this game with my distance students in a useful way. And I'm getting there in terms of my own development with these exercises. And we will talk a little bit more about how that has come about a little later in the session with some additional tweaks that we've made. So I'm going to continue, but hopefully this comes back. And if it doesn't answer your question all that well, let me know and we'll get more into it. So here's kind of where things got sticky. So as with anything, this is a good problem, right? This is a good problem, is that other people are asking, you know, what you're up to. If you're in a building that other faculty don't usually see you in because you're doing instruction for someone that we haven't really done this for before, people tend to notice. And so that was what was happening. I had faculty colleagues saying, you know, what brings you in this building today? And I would explain what we were doing, and that it was a lot of fun, and that the students really seemed to engage with this in a way that is sort of surprising given the misery that seems to come along with citation. There's a myriad of negative emotions that seem to come along with citation, but they're rarely positive emotions. So the sessions tend to be energizing for me as well. So it's a good time to catch me and talk about it. And so I would tell them, you know, the feedback seems to be really good, so it's just something we've started doing every semester. And then they would say, well, I want to do it too. And then you'd have to think about their class and what's different about their class. So, for example, I have one faculty member who's a political scientist, and he uses Chicago style. So now I'm way more used to MLA and APA probably as a librarian. I can do Chicago if you need me to, but I don't have a lot of automatic recall. So that can be tricky in itself when someone wants you to do a style that you're not that comfortable with. Then his class is just a little bit bigger. So instead of having, you know, usually 10 to 12 people per team, you know, his class might have more like 25 to 35 students instead of 20 to 30. And so then you're talking bigger teams, and either you need more resources per team, which actually makes it harder to do with time limitations because they need to write more citations and correct more citations, or you need an additional team, which means I need a whole new set of items to work off of, but that the students still have the same quantity of items to work on. So what I decided to do was actually that latter option, and creating more teams, but have the same amount of items. And I brought in, as I mentioned earlier, an additional librarian. So I gave the new librarian one team, the faculty member one team, and myself 2 teams to manage. And they don't have a lot of Chicago style training, so I had to go through and try to pull together resources that they would be able to use quickly. I'm certainly not going to buy them all a Chicago manual style. I'm not even sure I can afford that for myself some days. But we don't have a really good web-based option for them, or we didn't at that time. So we needed to find some takeaways for them that would work as well. So it was a little bit challenging to get off the ground, but ultimately things went pretty well. Then it got more complicated when I had another faculty member express interest for a 100-level class for APA style with even more students, so looking more in that 45 to 55 student range, and less time. So instead of a 75-minute section like I was used to, I was now dealing with a 50-minute section. And losing 25 minutes for something like a relay that involves citation and detail-oriented work is really, really hard. So that is kind of the bulk of where I want to go with this presentation in terms of trying to shift the relay into a bigger class with less time. So I ended up with 3 approaches to date, pretty much. And I'm calling them the first, the revision, and the whole different thing, because the first 2 approaches are ones that I sort of feel bad about retrospectively, but it led me to the 3rd approach, so I can't be too upset about it. So I won't spend much time on the first and the revision, and hopefully we can spend more time on the whole different thing. So with the first approach, I wanted to keep the groups and the teams. I knew I couldn't bet on them having guides on hand. I wanted to make sure that we got them into familiarity with scholarly articles. And I wanted to give them an opportunity to work on in-text citations and references. So those were my basic goals. And what I ended up doing was printing out multiple copies of a scholarly journal article. So if I had, and again, I'm going to try for simple numbers here, but if I were prepping for 5 teams that each had 10 people on them, I would have 10 copies each of 2 scholarly articles, and I'd ask them to create a proper APA citation for each of these, so as if they were adding it to a references list. And they would have resource sheets, and they would have the full extent of the article so that they would be able to pull whatever they needed to from those pages. I'd also have 10 copies of an additional scholarly article. And this was kind of ridiculous. I ended up writing numbers on the references list pages, so next to 5 different references, and I'd ask them to create in-text citations for those references. My hope was that they would actually look through the article a little bit and see how they were making the in-text citations. I tried to choose things that were using at least what I would do for an APA style in-text citation as the article, so that they would have some cues in there as well as in their reference sheets. They work in their groups, talking, whatever they need to do throughout. Winners get stickers. I also had stickers for the not winners. I was feeling a little insecure. Everybody gets stickers, they just get different stickers. And I decided to call this a citation sprint because I had less time and I had more students, and it's either that or I have to call it like a melee or something. I mean, it's kind of a crazy environment for 50 minutes, but it's meant to be faster, and it's meant to require less expertise and coordination. However, students had a hard time with the exercise. They weren't used to looking at scholarly articles, period. Most of them are freshmen, probably 95% of them are freshmen. They don't have a huge vocabulary about citing yet in terms of, a bibliographic reference or an in-text citation. These are words that a lot of our students are just not that accustomed to at the 100 level courses. They get there hopefully by the end of the course, but early mid-course, not quite so much yet. And so they had trouble executing the actual sprint components because they had a hard time really grasping what I was asking them to do. I will also say that it did not really require less coordination. Because there was a lot to hand out and there was a lot to collect, and then there was a lot to collate both before and after to make sure that all the groups had the right numbers of the right things. And because of all of that, I don't think it was as fun for them or for me. So I tried this for a semester, and then I decided to make some changes, which brings us to the revision. I kept the groups, I kept the entire approach, and I thought maybe flipping it so that they worked on in-text citations and then they worked on the references might help, sort of doing the smaller thing first, more of like a warm-up, and then shifting into the full-fledged writing of 2 references. And I was basically trying to figure out, is this me? Is it them? Is it both of us? And when I say me, I mean the activity that I am designing. And when I say them, I'm saying the readiness of those students for the activity that I've designed. Not that they are flawed, or obviously I am not flawed, but my activity could be, and their preparedness for the activity could be. So yet again, the activity proved to be less than what I wanted. You want that, as I mentioned earlier, you want the competitive air, you want students able to interact and talk and debate things, because that's where some of that critical thinking should be happening, where they're trying to make an informed decision about what they're writing down. And you want an activity that students can grasp pretty immediately. And so after trying it this way for a semester in these bigger, shorter, less prepared classes, I came to the conclusion that it was either me or both. And neither one of those is a good situation for the students. So I felt like I wasn't ready to pitch this to other departments yet. I wanted this activity to be portable to other departments and citation styles, and I didn't feel it yet, so I needed to change things up yet again, which leads us to the whole different thing. So I sat myself down, had a good long talk with myself, and I asked a couple of questions. The first was, what did I really want to achieve? So thinking about backward design. And did I need to stay close to the design of the initial citation relay and just scale it down in terms of the time commitment and scale it up in terms of the number of students to actually achieve those goals? The way I had been approaching things was sort of like a modified version of what we would do in a relay. Can you take this and build a citation off of it? But there's less than I would give you with a class where you've had more preparation. And the answer to the first question about what I wanted to achieve became, I want students to gain confidence with citing. And I may have known that going in before, but I was really kind of committing myself to that idea. But also confidence with citing at their level. And I wanted to do what librarians often say and meet them where they are. So that brought up the question, well, where are they? Do I know where they are as well as I think I do? So I asked myself, what do I see students struggling with specifically when it comes to citing? And lots of things came to mind. They included, they struggle with having enough critical thinking skills to know that they can shift from MLA to APA as long as they have a sense of what they're doing with MLA. It's transferable skills. They struggle to observe what they need to observe to know what they're looking at in terms of the type of the source. So a newspaper versus a magazine, a blog versus a web page, a book versus a book chapter versus a scholarly journal article. They struggle to find low stakes opportunities to practice citing, so outside of a paper or an assignment or a quiz. They struggle to use consistency in their approach to citing. So the paper may have half beautiful citations, half YouTube links. It might be half MLA, half APA, some weird version of both of them. And of course, related to that, they struggle with applying rules to citing. So what I decided to do was to keep the things that make the relays successful, which in my mind are the group activity, the team orientation, winning / rewards / stickers, any of those components, the competition, and having a tiered approach. So, where you would have to do the first and then the second and the third and the fourth and so on of the individual citations at the board in order to get some of that energy of progress. And then I decided to change it to better fit what I sought to achieve based on those issues that I discussed. So now we have the rebirth of the citation sprint. So I want to show you guys one of the worksheets that I use. So here's an example of what a team would get. I have, thank you for the time, Emery, too. So here's an example of what a team would get. I have 6 teams per class session in these bigger classes, more than what would be tough for myself and the instructor to manage. More than that would be tougher, sorry. And it limits the amount of paper that I carry with me, because basically each person on a team gets this worksheet rather than a pile of sources. And there's basically 4 legs to this. And they do still get a resource packet, which will be a link within these slides. So the 4 legs involve a themed approach. So team 6, all their sources are about interrogations and criminal justice. Other ones might be body cams and criminal justice. So they all sort of get a team identity of sorts. Leg 1, I aim for, can you tell me what you're looking at? Leg 2, can you put the citation parts in order? Leg 3, can you order your citations for a references list. And leg 4, can you generate in-text citations for your sources? So here's just a quick rundown of how it works. First, I would have the students look at the table on the worksheet, and they need to be able to realize that there's only one citation per column. And they need to tell me which column has the book, the website, the video, the newspaper article, and the scholarly article. And they can just write a number in those fields. The idea here is that they're using critical thinking and deductive reasoning to get it done, and that they'll develop some confidence in comparing what sample citations look like for different types of items and comparing it to what they have in their resources. Then leg 2, what I want them to do is actually look at each column one by one and put the order, put things into the right order. Again, just using numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They'll develop confidence knowing what may be unique about a citation or of a particular type of item. They'll also be developing their own key as this goes along so that they can look at this again later and know what parts they need for certain types of items and what order they go in and what they look like. On a different sample worksheet, I'll highlight the fact that well, the next thing that we do is I have them indicate what order the columns would go in on a list of references. So the reason why Jamstan in citation 2 is circled here is because in leg 2, they already know where all the authors of the citations are. And for the video, this is the author for citation 2. And that's just straight up a handle for a YouTube account. And so that's something that can be tricky for them. Do I put it under S for Stan, because Stan is kind of a name, or do I put it under J? Same thing, sometimes I try to add in a organizational author as well, which often comes up with government resources. I consider the sticking points of these sheets to be good in the sense that these are questions that students have. These are questions that come up. And if we're going to agree that research is inquiry, we want to help train them to do research by helping them ask questions. And so we do try to slip a few interesting rules in there so that they get used to thinking their way through that and to understanding that I'm going to be patient with them and I'm going to answer their questions. And then in leg 4, the last part, they just have to actually write for the first time, pretty much, and they have to write in-text citations for each citation. And so they're practicing the ampersands, they're practicing how to build in dates and things like that. There's also a key that will be linked in the slides as well. And so just to kind of wrap up how this has been going, things continue to grow and they grow well. Since changing this up this past fall, we had really positive student feedback, and I've expanded the opportunities to use this in other disciplines with other styles. So I now have a Chicago style, so when we were looking at the APA, I now have a Chicago style that I can use, and I have used it in a 100-level human geography course. It's a situation where a faculty member had told them to choose what style works for you, and that doesn't tend to go very well with a lot of students or faculty members ultimately. And so I showed her what I did for the criminal justice students. She said, let's try that with my geography students. We chose some themes, we made some sheets, and it's been going over quite well. She also decided to offer some competitive extra credit for it, so it goes 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in terms of the points that they receive based on who gets done first. And to get back at the question that we had earlier about using this in a distance education scenario, I do currently have a request from an English 112 instructor who's teaching an online section who basically wants to use an MLA version of these worksheets as an extra credit option for her students just to test it out and see how they do. My thought right now is that that's good because it keeps it low stakes for everybody while we're trying it out. But also I'm thinking I may give each student maybe 2 or 3 worksheets so that instead of getting the competition out of it, what they get is maybe more practice and more to refer to later. And in case anyone does want more data, I do have a little bit more that I can show that's focused on how this particular sprint, so the earlier data was for relays, but this data regards how the sprints went just a month or so ago with the geography classes. So the gray bars and the red numbers are the before, and the green bars and the black numbers are the after. And so we're seeing a fairly traditional shift from I'm pretty uncomfortable to, hey, I've grown quite a bit more comfortable. And one of my favorite quotes was, "Thank you. I now know that I can literally come to you guys for anything." And that's really what we're trying to get across as part of this, is that, you know, asking questions is a powerful skill, and understanding that I don't have fangs and I'm not going to bite you is part of that, but also understanding that you can talk to each other and build your skills is really good as well. I also had some feedback indicating that this was a positive experience for visual learners. Someone said that they would like for it to be a little bit longer, and that they think every class should go through this activity because you learn a lot while having fun. And I think that kind of wraps things up for me in terms of what I wanted to go through. But I think, you know, it's a very different approach than the relay, but overall it's proving to me that there are ways to get at this content effectively and in a way that ends up being much more fun for the students. Do I explain the elements to the citation so that the students can determine the things that are in the article, book, et cetera, before they cite? And so I think having the resource sheets tends to help them with that. I choose pretty specific options, and actually let me bring that up. I think I can get to it pretty fast. This should be the resource sheets. Nope, that's the key. Sorry, guys. I'll get there. Okay, so the resource sheet that should pop up any minute is a pretty full documentation. I wanted it to be something that they kept and could use over and over again. And so I give them this little style checklist that really, there's not much that they have to remember based on this, but as they go through the checklist, what comes up next is the guide from Trinity Library that I liked a lot, that, you know, book, and it has the format followed by the sample citation that they can look at. And I made sure that it had options for everything that I was going to be giving them in terms of types of items. So we've seen the book, we've seen the scholarly article, we've seen a newspaper article, and then it also goes into the parenthetical citations as well for them. Yeah, I think there's actually, just because I see your question, there is a link at the bottom of it that helps you get to it as well. So I'll make sure that I get this to you all. It's pretty helpful for them. And then I do have examples of a formatted paper, which should be their guide for leg 3, which is making sure that they can put their citations in order. And finally, an online video or an image. So I wanted to make sure we caught that as well. I should mention one thing that we brought in for the Chicago style that was pretty cool was adding in the need to add in a page number to the newspaper in-text citation, as well as a page number for the scholarly article citation, and a time stamp for the video. And what's useful about that is when we look at the key, sorry it's sideways, but I'll try and point this out as best as I can. When you see the keys, for example, this is, again, the APA style one. And so I would say something like Ekholm 2016 A11, something like that. And so you can see how I would build in a page number for that. It gets a little bit more challenging for the scholarly articles, which are hopefully longer than a page, because the students will tend to, given the example, put the entire range. And then we have a really nice option to have a conversation about the fact that, well, you're probably not including a citation for the entire scholarly journal article in your paper, right? And so then they're like, oh, right, so we just choose a page. What happens in the Chicago style for the video is that Chicago style citations, so if we're looking at the video option here, which is citation 4, the Chicago style actually brings in the duration of the video to the citation itself. And so the conversation that comes up at that point is, well, you know, so we put in this time, and you're like, all right, well, that's literally, you're indicating to me that you're citing from the exact final second of the video, because what that time is the entire duration of the video, not the you know, a particular time in the video. And so then they have to choose a time within that time length. And so, as I said, it's just a way for them to develop the expertise in terms of what's included in the citation and how that might be different from what they would include within an in-text citation. And as a result of that shift in Chicago, which I think was good, and it added an extra little level of difficulty to the final leg, which I think is appropriate in a race of some sort. I then have brought that into the APA sprint, where we have a page number needed for the newspaper article and the scholarly journal article. So the ones that we have page numbers for, we have brought that in as a way to practice quoting and not just a basic citation in text. And I do try to have examples for the in-text citations where there's a single author, there's multiple authors, so practicing the ampersands, there might be an organizational author, things like that. So they start learning how to treat those. And again, this is sort of what their sheet should look like at the end. And so this is something that, in addition to the resource packet, they get to keep for themselves and refer back to later. I don't know if you guys have had this problem, but I have it sometimes. Students come up and they need to cite something really specific, and I've got to dig around in multiple places to try to find the exact right rule to look for. And not only that, if you're on the web, different websites give different results. It may be slightly less current, or it may not have all the elements that you're looking for. And our students are going through the exact same process where they're struggling to find the right option to use. There's a lot of focus on, well, how do I know this is right? How do I do the right thing? Or you have the opposite, which is that they don't care enough to really try. And so hopefully this activity is showing them that there is a detail orientation, but this is very doable. This is very achievable. This is something that you and your classmates can have a brief conversation about and deduce what the right thing is to do. And you've got other resources like within the library that you can use for this discussion too. So thank you, Janelle. Are there any other questions? So I'll get you all an example. So the key that I use for the APA version of the sprint and the key or the resource packet for the APA sprint as well. And those are things that anyone should be able to get to based on that link. Oh, I sent those to Emery only. Thank you, Emery. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Karen. I'd like to add in, really, none of this could have been possible without the folks at Northern Colorado for starting with the relays and helping me get into them and try to find ways to bring it into other settings. So I really appreciate all the things that they have put out there for us to benefit from. But I really suggest some of these options as ways to bring citation skill building and low stakes interactive environments together in your campus and see what you can do too. And then you can change everything that I did for your environment.